Johnny Depp's secret comeback plan that Hollywood tried to stop is not what most people expected. While headlines kept recycling old stories, the real moves were happening quietly behind closed doors. New projects greenlit on his own terms, careful partnerships chosen for creative control, and a deliberate return to roles that let him disappear into characters again instead of fighting public narratives. Audiences who stayed loyal never stopped showing up, and that support became harder for the industry to ignore. What happened next was less about force and more about steady persistence, and the results are already shifting how people talk about his future. That the quiet persistence that followed those early moves showed itself most clearly in the projects he chose when the big studio doors stayed mostly shut. After the high-profile legal chapter ended, he stepped into smaller, more personal work that let him stay connected to the craft without waiting for permission. The French production Johnny Depp placed him in the role of Louis XV and opened the Cannes Film Festival in a way that felt deliberate rather than desperate. It was not a loud declaration, but a steady return to the kind of character immersion that had always defined his approach. Around the same time, he moved behind the camera again for the first time in more than 2 decades, directing Modi 3 Days on the Wing of Madness, a portrait of the painter Amedeo Modigliani that premiered at festivals and later reached North American theaters. In interviews around that period, he spoke simply about the process of directing, saying the experience reminded him why he loved the work in the first place, and that the legal years had taught him more than he ever expected, even if he would rather have avoided them. Those comments appeared in places like The Telegraph, where he described being shunned, dumped, and canceled by the industry, yet refused to let the language define the next chapter. Instead, he kept showing up for music collaborations and art exhibitions that stayed true to the creative habits he had always maintained on the side. The audience that had followed him through the years never fully left. Ticket sales for the smaller films and streams of older titles continued to register support that executives could measure, even if they preferred not to discuss it openly. That quiet loyalty became part of the pressure that slowly shifted the conversation. By the middle of the decade, the first major studio offers began to surface again. Lionsgate moved forward with Day Drinker, an action thriller that reunited him with Penelope Cruz and added Madeline Klein to the cast. Filming took place in Spain, and the project carried a release date in 2027, marking one of the earliest clear signals that distributors were ready to bet on his name again. At the same time, Paramount, under new leadership, picked up a darker reimagining of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol titled Ebenezer, directed by T. West. The role of the miserly Scrooge offered the kind of full character transformation that had always suited him, and the studio scheduled the film for November 13th, 2026. The cast around him included Ian McKellen as Jacob Marley, Rupert Grint as Bob Cratchit, Daisy Ridley as the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, and Andrea Riseborough, among others. When the first trailer arrived during San Diego Comic-Con in July 2026, Depp himself appeared in full Scrooge makeup walking the Gaslamp Quarter streets and later stepping into Hall H. The trailer opened with a line that landed with unmistakable weight for anyone who had followed the long stretch of absence. It is good to be back. Sources close to the production described him as focused and energized by the work, noting that he treated the project as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity rather than a simple return. He accepted a more modest upfront salary in exchange for a meaningful share of the back end if the film performed a practical arrangement that showed he was willing to share risk while still believing in the material. The same period brought news that he would produce the first English-language feature adaptation of Mikhail Bulgakov, The Master and Margarita, through his company into film, with production planned for late 2026. Parallel conversations with longtime Pirates of the Caribbean producer Jerry Bruckheimer continued. Bruckheimer told Entertainment Weekly that he had spoken with Depp about a possible 6th film and believed the actor would return if the script felt right, emphasizing that the page had to serve the character the same way it had when Jack Sparrow was first created. None of these moves arrived as sudden miracles. They were the result of years spent working on his own terms, choosing roles and partnerships that protected creative space while the broader industry recalibrated. The public conversation that once focused almost exclusively on past headlines gradually made room for the new footage, the festival appearances, and the simple fact that audiences still showed up. In one of the more recent interviews, he reflected on the necessity of purpose, saying a life without it can feel empty even when everything else looks complete. That same steady focus appears in the way he has approached the current slate. The Scrooge role in particular lets him explore a man forced to confront what he has become and decide whether change is still possible, a story that carries obvious emotional weight without needing to be overstated. The production itself leaned into the gothic atmosphere that T. West is known for, turning the familiar Christmas tale into something darker and more unsettling while still preserving the core journey of reckoning and second chances. When Depp appeared in character at Comic-Con, the reaction from the crowd was immediate and warm, the kind of response that reminds studios why certain performers remain hard to replace. The trailer itself mixed moments of the character throwing snowballs at passersby with quieter scenes of isolation and the eventual supernatural intervention that forces him to look backward and forward at the same time. The line "it is good to be back" delivered in that distinctive voice landed less as marketing and more as a quiet acknowledgement of the distance traveled. None of this erases the earlier chapter or pretends the industry response was anything other than cautious and sometimes cold. What it does show is a practical path built on consistent work-selective collaboration and an audience that refused to disappear. The combination of Day Drinker, Still Ahead, Ebenezer arriving this November, the producing role on The Master and Margarita, and the Open Door Tour, another possible Pirates chapter, forms a slate that looks less like a single comeback stunt and more like the natural continuation of a career that never fully stopped. He has spoken in recent years about accepting fear, recognizing it, and then moving past it, a simple idea that seems to track with the way he has handled the professional rebuilding. The projects themselves stay rooted in character, work the kind that requires full immersion rather than surface charm. Whether it is the powdered formality of Louis XV, the chaotic energy of Modigliani, or the bitter isolation of Scrooge, the through line remains the same: a performer who disappears into the part and lets the story carry the weight. Hollywood did not open every door at once, and some remain closed, but the ones that did open came after years of smaller, consistent steps that kept the work alive. The support from longtime viewers, the measured interviews, and the actual films now moving through production and promotion form the real substance behind the title. There is no single secret document or dramatic confrontation, just a steady refusal to wait for perfect conditions and a willingness to keep creating while the larger machinery slowly adjusted. That approach has already delivered a major studio release on the calendar, a second one following close behind, and a producing credit on a literary adaptation that has long resisted English language treatment. The audience that stayed through the quieter years is now seeing the results arrive in theaters, and the industry that once kept its distance is once again attaching its name to the work. The story continues with every new frame of footage and every new conversation about what comes next, but the foundation was laid in the years when the work itself was the only reliable constant thought of this quiet path from independent films to a major studio return. As Scrooge and Ebenezer resonated with you, leave a comment with the first Johnny Depp role that made you a fan. Share this with someone who stuck with the work through the quieter years, and hit that like button so more people can see the real story behind the comeback that kept moving forward. Subscribe if you want updates on Day Drinker, The Master, and Margarita, and whatever comes next. The projects are already on the calendar, and the audience that never left is the reason they exist.